Hey everyone, welcome to the video. This one we're going to go over some of my favorite plays, my core plays for week 11 of the NFL season on Draftkings. And before we continue, if you could leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out, really appreciate it. You can also follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16. And if you're interested in the spreadsheet I build every single week for the NFL season, I got projected ownership, projections, my cash game rankings that I show you guys every single week in my first look video, my cheat sheet, and all the stats you need to know, that good stuff. Links available in the description below for my Patreon. You can also get into my Slack chat where you can just talk football all day with me or ask me any questions you want. We got a bunch of people in there. Happy to help out as well. Alright, so anyway, that's enough plugging. Let's get into the video. So, I got 3 quarterbacks for you right now. And I got Lamar Jackson as my number 1, 7,700 versus Houston. Now, I'm typically not a guy that likes to spend all the way up at quarterback because it usually hurts like a high-end running back or a high-end wide receiver. So we will see if I'm able to fit in Lamar Jackson this week. But, I mean, if I can, obviously I like him a lot. And just first off, the guy is a straight video game. I mean, he's like Michael Vick 2004, Madden 04. If you guys ever played Madden 04, you just get Michael Vick in the I formation, just do the little bootleg out and just run him down every single play. That's what I did. So, I mean, Lamar Jackson, you can't stop the guy. I mean, I know you guys saw that run last week where, he made a juke and then he hit the B button, the spin move on the Cincinnati defender, then ran it all the way to the house. I think it was like a 50-yard touchdown, something around there, rushing touchdown. So that was awesome, and that's what he can do every single week. This is the highest total of the week, too, 51.5 points, and the Baltimore Ravens have a 28-point team total, which I believe is second highest on the slate. I know it's up there. It's top 3 for sure. And on the ground, he's averaging 8.67 carries per game and 78 rushing yards. I mean, you don't get that from any other quarterback. He's in his own tier when it comes to that. I know you think of guys like Deshaun Watson as rushing quarterbacks, but he does not even come close to anything like Lamar Jackson does. No one does. His average rushing numbers, if you just, 78 rushing yards to 7.8 points. We'll give him 8. We'll just round it up to 8. You're starting off the game with 2 passing touchdowns as your floor. It's just your average floor from Lamar Jackson. You do not get that from any single other quarterback. I mean, if he gets 80 rushing yards, that's like throwing 2 touchdowns, and that's what he's averaging every single week. You are getting a running back that can also throw the ball. I'm not saying he can't throw the ball, but I just mean in general terms. The guy's a running back, and he throws the ball too. So you're getting insane upside. And so 7,700, that's why I'm not like too scared of paying all the way up for Lamar Jackson because, most quarterbacks, they just throw the ball. But with Lamar Jackson, I feel like I'm getting an extra running back on my roster because the guy's going to run the ball. I mean, he's ran the ball like mid-teens in certain games where he's at over 15 carries. And you don't, like I said earlier, you don't get that from anybody else. He is just his own special weapon, whatever you want to call him. So Lamar Jackson, I do feel comfortable spending up for him if you can. So, I mean, he's got a really safe floor. He's got a really high ceiling. He only threw the ball 17 times last week, and he scored 33 fantasy points. It's just insane. And the Texans are giving up 23 points per game to quarterbacks, which is 6th most in the NFL this season, 295 passing yards and 2 touchdowns per game. So they've not been a very good pass defense whatsoever. The Texans are 23rd DVOA versus the pass. So Lamar Jackson, I think he should be able to get the job done through the air and on the ground in this game. So you got the highest ceiling of any quarterback here. He's got a really safe floor. So if you can spend all the way up for a quarterback this week, I think Lamar Jackson's a pretty safe way to go, cash and GPP. Next guy I like is Drew Brees at 6,900 versus Tampa Bay. We have a 50.5 over-under, 27.25 team total for the Saints. And this is going to be a game I want fantasy pieces from. You're going to see a couple guys in this game, I believe. Quite a few. So he burned everyone last week, but he should bounce back versus a pass funnel defense in Tampa. I said last week I think I spelled funnel wrong, but I'm not sure. I'm still not sure, so I spelled it the same way. No one said anything. So, and Google didn't give me the red squiggly line, so I figured it's good. But they're allowing 26.3 points per game to quarterbacks, which is 2nd most in the league, and they're also 27th DVOA versus the pass. They're giving about 311 passing yards per game, and I believe 2 passing touchdowns. I think I forgot the 2. I'm pretty sure it was 2. It's over 2. Or it's somewhere around there. But you guys get the idea. They are a horrible pass defense. Tampa is also, like I said, they're a pass funnel defense. It's hard to run on these guys, and it's kind of like the Saints defense is going to be this week. But Tampa is the number 1 DVOA run defense in the league right now. They're allowing the 2nd fewest points per game to running backs. We saw Murray and Kamara struggle last week. I could see the same of that. I could see that happening again. And I think Kamara should have a decent game here, but I'm not actively trying to target Kamara this week. He is a little cheap, so I think he might be an okay GPP option. But I much prefer the passing game here for the Saints. And just not a couple weeks ago, but earlier in the season, I forget which week it was exactly. Was it week 6? I don't remember exactly, but Teddy Bridgewater, he had 314 passing yards and 4 touchdowns versus Tampa, and he had 31 fantasy points. Obviously, Drew Brees, no knock to Teddy Bridgewater, he was just fine when he was filling in, but Drew Brees is a much better quarterback, so I think he can have a fantastic game here, and I'll take him at 6,900. Then my cheap quarterback of the week is Kyle Allen at 5,300 versus Atlanta. And you guys are going to see a lot of Panthers in this video, but they're just mispriced and they're in a good matchup. So it's going to be a Panther week, I think. We got a 49 over-under, and the Panthers have a 27.5 team total, which is pretty darn high for the Panthers. And he's my favorite punt quarterback of the week, and he's going to allow you to fit in the studs. Only problem is I don't love playing the same quarterback. The quarterback that's on the same team as my running back, because it's not always great correlation. But Christian McCaffrey also is a part-time wide receiver, so it's not the worst correlation. It doesn't feel great in cash games, but I do think it's viable. But I feel like when I was making this video, I feel like I've talked about 20 Panthers players, so I'm not going to fit in the whole Panthers lineup in cash games because that's a risk, but just know they're all pretty darn good plays, and especially Kyle Allen this week. Atlanta is allowing 23.7 points per game to quarterbacks, which is 5th most in the league. And I know Drew Brees just had a pretty bad game versus them, but that's a divisional game. The Falcons stepped up. They probably saved Dan Quinn his job for a little bit. So they stepped up, but I don't expect that trend to continue. They're 31st DVOA versus the pass and are 30th on PFF in pass coverage this season. So I don't expect much here from Kyle Allen, but I think he's going to be just fine. I think I can easily see him tossing 2 touchdowns and getting 200 to 250 yards, which is just fine for his price tag. He's only 5,300. I think he can get a Ryan Tannehill type of game in the past 3 weeks of what he's done, and I've been pretty much saying you can play Ryan Tannehill the past 3 weeks, and he's done just fine. I think Kyle Allen can replicate that. He's got some good weapons to throw to. He's got Christian McCaffrey, he's got Greg Olsen, he's got Curtis Samuel, he's got DJ Moore, so he's on a pretty good team. Vegas likes him this week, so Kyle Allen, I think he's a pretty slam dunk value play this week at quarterback. Christian McCaffrey at running back, so every single week you can play Christian McCaffrey. He's 10,500, and he is the volume king, and that's the most important thing in fantasy. I don't care what anyone says. Volume is the most important thing. Obviously, yeah, talent and efficiency is good too, but give me volume over any of those things. And obviously, if you compare those up with talent and efficiency, like we can with Christian McCaffrey, yeah, you're a pretty darn good play. And there is no such thing as too expensive price tag for McCaffrey because he can do things that other people can't. Kind of like Lamar Jackson, although I'd much rather prioritize a running back than a quarterback. So that's why Christian McCaffrey is my number 1 play of the week, just in terms of projections, because obviously. But yeah, he's averaging 27.11 touches per game, which is first. 20.56 rushing attempts per game, first. 109.89 rushing yards per game, first. And 6.56 targets per game, fourth. So he's at first in everything. But pretty much first in most categories, and he's averaging 32.28 points per game, which is the most. But the second highest is Dalvin Cook at 25.55. So it's actually a pretty substantial difference. You're talking like almost 7-point difference between the first place guy and the second place guy. So that just shows you how much better than Christian McCaffrey has been than anyone else this season. So the price tag is justified. I mean, when he was in the high 8K, 9K range, that was just way too cheap, and he's just a free square every single week. So now they're making us think a little bit at 10,500, but he should have a pretty good game here. Falcons have been middle of the road versus the run, but we've seen good running backs have good games versus them, and it's just so easy to pass on them. He's the safest play every single week, and he's got the most upside of it out of anyone every single week, although Michael Thomas is right up there with him. But Christian McCaffrey, you can't go wrong with him, so I feel just fine plugging him in despite the high price tag. And there's a lot of value on this slate. Earlier in the week, I was a little iffy if we could fit in Christian McCaffrey because on my first look video with Zeke to save the money. But it's looking like it's pretty easy to fit in McCaffrey this week, so I think he should probably be one of your top cash game plays for sure. Josh Jacobs at 6,900 versus Cincinnati. I talk about Josh Jacobs a lot. I mean, it probably seems like I'm a big fan of him, and I am. I think he's pretty darn good. I have him in all my season-long leagues as well, and I've been pretty happy with him. He's been a top 10 running back this season in volume. It's very important, and when you compare that with efficiency and talent, like I said with McCaffrey, it's great, and that same goes for Josh Jacobs. The guy is talented. He's a very good running back. He's number 1 in rush grade on PFF, I think right above Nick Chubb. Number 1 in elusive rating, 7th in yards per attempt, 8th in explosive runs, which is like over 10, 15 yards. 5th in yards after contact per attempt, and 2nd in broken tackles behind Chris Carson. The guy is very good. He's also a home favorite running back, and like I say every week, that's a great correlation. He's a home favorite running back. Raiders have a 29-point team total. The Raiders have a 29-point team total. Isn't that crazy? It kind of took me off guard. and our 10.5 point favorites. Like I said, he's at home, so this just sets up as a perfect game for someone like Josh Jacobs, who's not the biggest pass catcher on the road. Last week, he did have 5 targets, though, which was awesome. I believe he had 30 yards receiving, so that was something really nice. So if that trend continues, even better of a play if he's going to be involved in the passing game. At 6,900, I think he might be a little bit too cheap here. The guy's really good. And, he's got a great matchup here, too. Cincinnati's giving up 29.8 points per game to running backs, which is 3rd most in the league. Cincy is also 29th DVOA versus the run, allowing over 100 yards per game and 1 touchdown. And they're also the 4th worst rushing defense grade on PFF. So, great matchup for Josh Jacobs. I think this is a smash spot. I think he can get you over 100 yards on the ground and hopefully fall into the end zone 1 or twice. And I think he's a pretty good play at 6,900. I think he's the perfect RB2 this week. Then Brian Hill here at the punt, 4,800 versus Carolina. So it's Brian Hill chalk week this week, guys. So I don't see what could go wrong here. Freeman and Ito Smith are out, which leads us to the Brian Hill show in Atlanta. Last week versus the Saints, he had 21 touches, but he was not efficient with them whatsoever, albeit it was a tough matchup versus New Orleans, so maybe we can give him a little bit of a pass here. Now he draws an amazing matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, who are dead last, 32nd DVOA versus the run, and they just got beat up by San Francisco running backs, Tennessee. Although they didn't get destroyed by Tennessee, but they did allow rushing touchdowns to Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill. Then versus Green Bay, where Aaron Jones had a pretty good game. So not the best rushing defense in the world. They're also giving up 29.6 points per game to running backs, which is 5th most in the league. And he's pretty much the free square for cash games. Yeah, there's probably a good chance he busts, but he's going to be chalk, so who cares? In GPPs, yeah, if you want to fade him, but in cash games, I'm just plugging in Brian Hill. I don't care what he does. He's going to be high owned, so it's not going to affect me whatsoever, pretty much. So do like Brian Hill this week. As for wide receivers, we got Michael Thomas at 9,900. And like I said in my first look video, I think this is the toughest question of the week. Do you want to spend all the way up at running back, or do you want to spend all the way up for wide receiver? Because I don't think you're going to be able to do both. It's going to be very difficult, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to him in cash games because I'm typically team running back over wide receiver. But TBT, I really like Michael Thomas this week, and he's arguably the most consistent fantasy producer in the league. I know Christian McCaffrey is very consistent, very elite, but he had a single-digit game. I don't know if you guys remember that. It was on Thursday night versus Tampa Bay. I think he had 6 fantasy points. Michael Thomas has not had anything close to 6 fantasy points, and he hasn't had less than 16 points in the game this season, so it shows his high floor and extremely high ceiling. He leads the league in targets, receptions, receiving yards, target share, weighted opportunity share, just points for PPR scoring like Draftkings is, and he's been insanely good. He's pretty much the Christian McCaffrey of wide receivers. So, yeah, I mean, he's 9,900, but if you want to make him the staple of your lineup, I totally get it. There's always more risk with wide receivers because, things can happen. And Christian McCaffrey is going to get his 20-plus touches. So, obviously, I'm going to go with Christian McCaffrey over Michael Thomas in cash games, but I think Michael Thomas is a fantastic play. And like I said earlier, Tampa Bay is a pass funnel defense, and they're giving up a league high 50.6 points per game to wide receivers. You guys just saw Christian Kirk go bananas versus them last week, and I mean, he's good, but he's no Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas can absolutely dominate in this matchup. And last time out versus them, he scored 44 fantasy points. He was only 6,600 that week. I don't know if you guys remember that, but he was 6,600. That was just way too cheap. But yeah, and that was with Teddy Two Gloves at quarterback too, and he scored 44 fantasy points. So I mean, possibilities are endless here with Drew Brees back. So Michael Thomas, yeah, he's a fantastic option. I think it's a really tough question to ask yourself this week. Do you want to play Michael Thomas or you want to play Christian McCaffrey? Because I don't think you can fit both. If you can fit both, I mean, hey, go for it. But it's going to be tough. I was able to do it last week, but Michael Thomas was also only 8,300 last week, so it was much easier. And then more of a GPP option. I like Mike Evans a lot at 7,400. Originally, I had Chris Godwin here, and then I was like, I'm going to go with Mike Evans instead. And this is actually pretty bright. Hopefully, you guys can read this. But the main thing here is the loss of Marshawn Lattimore. He has not been practicing, so I'm going to assume he is out. If he somehow is in, I like Chris Godwin better. But we're assuming Marshawn Lattimore is going to be out. And he did goose versus him last year, so that's why I wouldn't have much interest in Mike Evans. But he's currently projected to be guarded by P.J. Williams. And I don't know about you guys, but that's a guy I like to pick on a lot. I've been doing it since last year. He's been the main slot corner for the Saints, and he's been giving up points to the slot all year. Because if you look at, just points versus what specific wide receiver positions, slot receivers versus New Orleans is a thing. That's where they get the points at versus the defensive unit for the Saints. So that's why I had interest in Godwin, but looks like P.J. Williams is going to shift to the outside and guard attempt to guard Mike Evans. I don't see that ending well, so I think this should be a pretty good game for Mike Evans, and I love this game for fantasy purposes. We got a 49.5 point team total, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are dogs at home, so I expect them to be throwing the ball a lot, which is something they like to do. They're probably going to struggle running against the Saints. Aaron Jones had a pretty good game last week, not on the ground, but through the air, so maybe he'll be fine there, but Saints rushing defense is very, very good. It's a top 5 unit in the league, and I believe they're allowing the second fewest. They're like top 5 fewest points allowed versus running backs this season. So I think they're going to struggle to run the ball because Ronald Jones, he struggled to run the ball versus Arizona. So I don't see why he'd have success here versus the Saints, and they're going to be trailing. So Mike Evans should get a ton of work here. And I think he and Michael Thomas are an amazing pairing in GPP lineups. Now, that means you're going to have to go cheap at running back. But if you want to go in a GPP, I don't mind going either Winston or Breeze, then getting both Mike Evans and Michael Thomas in a lineup. And you can also throw Chris Godwin on there as well. I think that's an excellent GPP pairing because I think this game could score a ton of points. I know last year, I don't know if you guys remember, this guy, I think it was like week 1 of the season. This game went absolutely nuts in Tampa Bay. So I could see something similar happen. And Evans, he has big play upside. He leads the league in air yards with 1,391 yards, which that leads all receivers by over 200 yards. The second is Keenan Allen, so we know he has insane upside. And like I said, New Orleans is more of a pass funnel defense, as is Tampa, so I can expect a lot of points to be scored in this game. And I think this is a big Mike Evans week, and I shouldn't say I'm not seeing a lot of people talking about him, but because I really haven't watched, I look at some other stuff online, but I haven't seen too much about Mike Evans. So if he's going to go a little bit if he goes less owned than he should be, I think it's a fantastic option to get overweight on in GPPs because we know his upside. So Mike Evans, I like him quite a bit. And he could go a little bit over if people are looking to jam in Michael Thomas. Then DJ Moore, 5,900 versus Atlanta. One of my favorite plays of the week for cash games for sure. This Carolina offense is just great for fantasy purpose because it's so concentrated. You know who's going to get the ball. A lot of offenses, you're just guessing a lot of the time. But for the Panthers, you know who it is. It's Kyle Allen throwing to either DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, or Christian McCaffrey's getting the ball. And then, the occasional Greg Olsen. So it's very concentrated. You know he's going to get the ball every single week. And they can all have good games. It's not just one guy has a good game one week and the other guy sucks. They can all have good games. It's nice. And they're cheap, too. And he's also been very consistent this season, scoring no less than 7 points in a game. And he's had back-to-back 20-point outings. So that's very nice to see. He has a 24% target share and is getting over 8 targets per game. And Atlanta is giving up 41.9 points per game to wide receivers, which is bottom 10 in the league. And he makes an excellent pairing with Kyle Allen as a nice value stack with some upside as well. So I like Kyle Allen to DJ Moore a ton this week, and I would expect him to be very high owned. I know a lot of people are talking about him. He if you're using optimizers or just making your own projections, and I have my own, and he's rating out as one of the top values on the slate for wide receivers, despite the but despite a price tag of $5,900. It's not like he's dirt cheap, but he's an excellent value. He should have a pretty good game here. And I also like Curtis Samuel, I also like Curtis Samuel a ton, who is slightly cheaper, and he's also been good as well, and he has upside. So, like both of them, they're right there. Then for a more value option at wide receiver, Deebo Samuel at 4,000 versus Arizona. I think he's one of the best value plays on the slate, in my opinion. He actually grades out as the number 1 value wide receiver for me on my sheet. And we know for sure George Kittle will be out, and he's leaving behind a 25% target share, a 27% market share of the air yards. And if Sanders is out, he leaves behind a 17% target share and a 25% market share of the team's air yards. Those are his stats for the first 2 games he's been with the not Cardinals, the 49ers. So there's a lot of open snaps here, and Deebo Samuel would be a main benefactor here. And he had a really good game last week. He scored 22 fantasy points, and he did see 83% of the snaps last week, which is a big jump from prior games. And we should expect something similar this week, if not more. Arizona's 26 DVA versus the pass and is bottom 10 in points allowed to wide receivers. So I think Deebo Samuel should have a pretty good game. There's a lot of missing pieces for the 49ers. I keep wanting to say Arizona for. The 49ers potentially, we know Matt Breida is dealing with an injury, George Kittle's out, and Emmanuel Sanders is dealing with an injury. So Deebo Samuel, I think, is a pretty great option at 4,000. I'd probably expect him to be higher owned as well, but he's going to allow us to fit in some studs too. So Deebo Samuel, I like him quite a bit. Then I got a couple tight ends I like. I'm not really in love with any tight ends this week, so I'm probably just going to go mid-range or spend down. But Jared Cook at 4,400 versus Tampa Bay. I think he makes a lot of sense here. It's it's not his first back. Last week was, but his first week back from injury last week. He saw 10 targets. I believe he got 6 of them he had a good game. I think it was like 17 fantasy points, or was it 17? Or I don't know. I think maybe it was 14. I don't remember, but it was a pretty good game for him. And he actually scored double digits the past 3 games he's played so far, and he has 2 touchdowns in that span. And Tampa is awful versus both wide receivers and tight ends. They should be able to pass on these guys very easily. And Tampa is giving up 18.8 points per game to tight ends this season, which is second most in the league, only behind the Arizona Cardinals. And he's just cheaper exposure to the Saints passing offense if you can't afford Michael Thomas, or if you can play both. I think they're both fine. They should both have good games. But if you can't afford Michael Thomas, I think Jared Cook's a nice cheap piece of this offense. So don't mind him. And then Greg Olsen, 3,900 versus Atlanta. And like I said, I feel like I'm just making a Carolina Panthers video because I've talked about CMC, I talked about Curtis Samuel, I talked about DJ Moore, I talked about Kyle Allen. Now we're on Greg Olsen, and I promise this will be the last Panther we talk about. But they're just all too cheap besides CMC, especially for their Vegas total, their implied team total, and the matchup versus Atlanta. And this is just a plain price and matchup play here. And there's never really anything too exciting about Greg Olsen. But he did have 10 targets last week, and we've seen him do well in a good matchup this year with Allen and versus Arizona and Tampa, which are both great matchups. He scored over 20 fantasy points in each game, and I believe he had 3 touchdowns, if I'm remembering correctly. I know he had 2 touchdowns versus Arizona. And Atlanta's a good matchup through the air as well. So Greg Olsen, I think he's fine at 3,900. I wouldn't recommend playing 5 of these guys in cash games, but I think 2 or 3 is just fine. I wouldn't feel too bad about it just because of their price. And I think they're going to put up points. And I don't love stacking in cash, but when an offense is just too cheap in a good spot and they got some talent, I make exceptions sometimes. Then one more tight end is Eric Ebron at 3,600 versus Jacksonville. So we're just scraping the bottom of the barrel here, but with Hilton out, we saw his snaps go from the 30% range, recent weeks to 61% last week, which was nice. He saw a season-high 12 targets last week as well. Now, that was with Brian Hoyer, but Jacoby Brissett is back, who's a much better upgrade. Brian Hoyer did not look good whatsoever. They lost that game versus Miami, and he just looked bad. So we'll see how Brissett targets him as much, if he targets him as much, but the increase in snaps were the most encouraging thing here. He's dirt cheap. We know he's got upside, too. He's had some really good games last year with Andrew Luck, so don't mind Ebron here at 3,600. I think he's fine. And then there's other guys I like, obviously, so I just put them on a short list here, and there's some other guys as well, but just some other interesting plays. I like Derek Carr as a GPP play versus Cincinnati. Cincinnati defense and offense as well sucks, but their defense is not great whatsoever. We saw what Lamar Jackson did last week. Derek Carr does not have anything close to Lamar Jackson upside. And I wish he was a little bit cheaper, but I think he's fine at 6,100. We got Zeke here at 9K versus Detroit. I think he's an interesting pivot off of CMC. He's not as safe as CMC. We've seen some clunkers out of him like last week versus Minnesota, but Detroit is like the second worst rush defense in the league right now, so you can obviously use Zeke here. They're favorites. Should be able to run the ball very well versus Detroit, so I think he makes sense. Tevin Coleman with Matt Breida out at 6,100. He makes a lot of sense versus Arizona. I expect them to play with the lead. Hopefully get 15, 20 touches. That'd be great. I think you should have a pretty good game. Curtis Samuel already hit on, but I thought I'd put him in here anyway at 5,300. Same matchup as DJ Moore. Not as consistent as DJ Moore, but he's got similar upside as well. Calvin Ridley. So Bradbury, he was practicing. So if he plays, he's going to be on Julio Jones. So that would leave Calvin Ridley running free, and no Austin Hooper. And they traded Mohamed Sanu. So Calvin Ridley at 5,500, I think he makes some sense as well. Tyrell Williams, kind of a GPP pairing with Derek Carr versus Cincinnati. Then Tyler Boyd. So I think the Raiders should have a pretty big lead here, and I kind of like the correlation play of playing Josh Jacobs with Tyler Boyd, because that would mean Josh Jacobs is running the ball because they have they had the lead, and then he should have a pretty good game on the ground. Then you run it back with Tyler Boyd because they are playing catch up. He's going to see his targets. There's no AJ Green. Oakland's pass defense is absolutely horrendous, so Tyler Boyd at 5,200, I think he makes some sense as well. And that's pretty much going to be it for the video, guys. Defense, just plug in whoever fits at the end. I don't care. So if you want to play the Cardinals at 1,500, I say go for it. But I'll leave you guys with that. Wish you guys the best of luck this week. Hopefully you guys enjoy the game tonight. Go Browns. Hopefully they win. Although I think I'm posting this video after the Browns game, so hopefully they won. But anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video. Wish you guys the best of luck this week, and I'll do my lineup building video probably tomorrow.